How far is a memorandum of understanding from actual peace? Washington is again purporting to be close to ending the war on Iran with a one-page MOU. According to Axios sources, it's the closest they've been to an agreement since the war began. But should those sources be trusted? I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers. Well, it could be described as a case of the boy who cried wolf, with the Trump administration reportedly saying again that they're inches away from a deal. And the war on Iran, if it's a war, is almost over. Just a few days ago, President Trump declared Project Freedom was underway to guide ships through the Strait of Hormuz, only to cancel that a day or so later. To be fair, it's getting rather old, and it's difficult to see any real progress made toward ending a conflict that is destabilizing the global economy. Here's a look.
About Iran and a couple of
Another day in the Iran war and another deal imminent, according to the US president.
Now we're doing well. Now we have to get what we have to get. If we don't do that, we'll have to go a big step further. But with that being said, they want to make a deal. We've had very good talks over the last 24 hours, and it's very possible that we'll make a deal. Yeah, please.
With reports that the US is trying to get Iran to agree on a one-page memorandum of understanding containing 14 points that would bring about an end to hostilities.
We are endeavoring to convert this ceasefire into a permanent end to this war.
Iran said on Wednesday that the proposal is still under review and it would communicate its final position after completing its assessment. But we've been here before. Trump has spoken of being near a deal several times, only for deadlines to be extended with no actual agreement in sight. And Iran has also dismissed the proposal by the US as nothing more than an American wish list. Both sides have been ignoring ceasefire conditions. On Truth Social, Trump posted that if Iran agreed, then epic fury could be ended. But if not, Iran would be subjected to even higher levels of bombing. And on Wednesday, Iran released a video purporting to be the wreckage of a combat reconnaissance drone that it said its defense forces had shot down over the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, the UN Security Council held a closed-door session at the request of Bahrain after it accused Iran of a heinous attack on the United Arab Emirates just one day earlier.
This dangerous escalation risk undermining ongoing diplomatic efforts and negotiation processes aimed at restoring regional stability.
Amid this backdrop, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi visited China to meet his counterpart in Beijing.
Our Chinese friends also believe that Iran after the war is different from Iran before the war, that it has attained an elevated international standing, that it has proven its capabilities and strength. Therefore, a new phase of cooperation between Iran and other countries lies ahead.
The US has urged China to apply pressure on Iran to help in reopening the Strait of Hormuz, but hasn't outlined what it wants a Chinese response to be.
China expresses grave concern over the attacks on the UAE and firmly opposes any acts that escalate regional tensions. China has always maintained that sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of the Middle East and Gulf countries should be earnestly respected, and that civilians and non-military targets should be protected.
Could the US-Iran war be on the brink of a brokered, longer-lasting peace? Or is it another Groundhog Day between Washington and Tehran? Either way, Trump's self-styled deal-making persona is being tested, and Iran appears to be holding more of the cards.
So joining me now to look further at the potential for a peace deal are from Toronto, former senior advisor at the U.S. State Department and the White House National Security Council under the Biden administration, Negah Angha. From Doha, military and diplomatic analyst Alexandru Hudisteanu. And from Tehran, Iran foreign policy analyst Mohammad Khatibi. Thank you all so much for being with me. Negah, supposedly there is something like a 30-day negotiation period attached to this MOU. But where do you really see this going? I mean, should Iran trust any negotiation period even when they've been attacked before during talks? Will there be real confidence in this at all?
I think that is the biggest question. But look, a memorandum doesn't necessarily stop the war on paper, but it does. But it does allow an end in the conflict, in the active fighting in practice. It allows both parties to see if there's an ability to have some form of durable peace, a durable peace settlement. Obviously, this is not one. We're in what would be a very fragile political pause, partially, I think, built on mutual exhaustion, economic pressure, and a lot of unresolved leverage points. And I think what it'll allow is a real concrete conversation so that both parties, one, can in many ways have a face-saving exercise to walk away from active fighting to allow for the real conversations to take place. I think a lot of the components that still remain unresolved are in and of itself each very big files that need to be discussed, right? The Strait of Hormuz, there is the component of the strikes happening in Lebanon by Israel, some of the other harder questions like uranium inspections, the missiles, the sanctions relief, proxy activity, all of those various components require, very technical experts, quite a bit of negotiations taking place. So I think in many ways, if this memorandum can freeze the current phase of the war, I think that in and of itself could be a very good step forward rather than a step backwards. But I think we need to make sure that we don't confuse de-escalation with resolution at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Because, I mean, quickly, you talk about real conversations taking place, but there have been so many stops and starts. And everyone is wondering whom we should actually listen to. I mean, that's kind of what we started this program with, because we've heard the White House say multiple times over many months now that they're close to a deal, they're inches away, and that Iran has come begging for something. When should we actually feel comfortable feeling like there's progress?
Right. No, and that's a fair question, especially when we think about the markets and what it means to our pocketbooks. And I think, what we need to be paying attention to more so than anything is behavior, not necessarily the announcements. I think the announcements are part of, a coercive diplomacy type engagement that we've seen. But I think 5 things are going to matter if we really want to see how concrete this is and where this goes. Does commercial traffic actually begin to normalize? Does Beirut remain an active front or not? Where are we with confirmed negotiations and the negotiation rounds? What we see quite a bit is there's a discussion of a date, a location, and then it falls apart hours before.
Right.
And do outside powers, we have to think about Europe, we have to think about China, we have to think about Israel, where do they fall in terms of where the conversations are? I think a lot of those indicators are going to be quite important that we need to pay attention to, and not a lot of these political declarations that open this Pandora's box of questions.
I mean, I can see Alexandru agreeing mostly there, but explain where you see this going, because many have complained that these talks are quite technical. Complex is really an understatement here, and that it does come down to a question of who's really at the table, who is negotiating on what grounds. And when there has been, as I said, so many stops and starts, that they really need to up their game on those negotiators themselves, particularly on the U.S. side. What do you think?
I think in all respects, since the beginning of the active conflict, US looked for a fast deal, and this is in line with what President Trump likes to do, and he calls himself the deal maker, and he holds the art of the deal. At the same time, we know that Iran has a very methodical approach to negotiation, and this is also in perspective to its historical interaction with US. and this lack of trust between the two parties. At the same time, we have Israel, which is, I would dare to say, the elephant in the room that was never in the room in Islamabad in that first meeting. And that's a wild card that will probably have to be discussed. And I'm pretty sure Iran will want to have a word about the fragmented war that happens now in Lebanon. And in the terms of negotiations themselves, I think we might be now closer than ever, because Iran also saw that US is willing to go all the way and it is willing to pull ships through the strait. And we know that Iran has kept the strait as its main bargaining chip in front of the nuclear file, which is actually the file of interest for US. In that respect, that's what I'm saying. I think we are closer than ever to proper negotiations, and I'm pretty sure that after that situation with the Project Freedom, which was abruptly shut down or at least suspended, in the words of President Trump, actually we see that square table shifted a little bit, and the discussion moved a little bit further, inched forward. That we have now this position in which we see, at least at the declaration level, that both sides are looking at some form of memorandum of understanding. That doesn't mean this memorandum of understanding will necessarily, it's a given right now in this very moment, but at least the discussion moved a little bit.
Just very quickly, when you talk about Project Freedom, I mean, do you think it gave Iran more of a negotiating position here, or did it work in favor of the U.S., even if it was canceled after basically a day, and they really didn't they got, I think, one ship through?
I think it gave US the nudge it needed for Iran to actually look at the response proposal, because Iran was building and has built this image of monolithic control on the strait, that nothing could pass. But we saw that actually 2 ships passed under US escort, and that's confirmed by Maersk, at least in the case of their ship. So that's not something that can be refuted now. What we saw, though, is Iran retaliating with full force, and it's something I said multiple times, that Iran will try to not lose Strait of Hormuz from its grasp, because that's their only leverage point ahead of the nuclear file. In the absence of Strait of Hormuz control, the only thing that US wants on the table it would be the nuclear file, and I think Iran wants to protect that particular part, so that it has another negotiation pointer, which is the Strait of Hormuz file. So in that respect, I think it gave US some power, but just to nudge a bit the discussion rather than some substantive leverage. If it would continue, then it would be more leverage power.
Well, let me ask Mohammad if he agrees there.
I don't think that is the case, because the United States and Trump himself, as the other guest said, is a dealer. So he wants to pressure Iran and see what is the response. So it did not escort the ships, but as the Speaker of the Parliament of Iran said, it is just a trust me, bro look by the United States. And it stopped after Trump administration saw that Iran is willing to go far and attack the ships which try to pass. So the incident, which involved attacks on US warships, is a signal that Iran is ready to defend the Strait of Hormuz with all its power. And if the United States tries to pressure Iran and try to reopen it by force, Iran will retaliate. And this time, Iran is signaling that if a new war is imposed on Iran, the war will be much more diverse and much more worse, because there is threats against not just the regional bases of the United States, but also other issues like the Strait of Bab al-Mandab, which Iran's allies, Ansarullah or Houthis, some say, can close the Strait of Bab al-Mandab. Also, there is a possibility of Iran attacking pipelines in the UAE. So
that Iran has been acting in a measured way, because you believe it does have other cards to play that it's yet to invoke. But Mohammad, you've also said that Iran is willing to offer concessions if the U.S. shows flexibility. So explain what concessions those would be.
So Iran will reopen the Strait of Hormuz if the United States stops its blockade of Iranian ships passing through the strait. So the strait was open and the United States, by attacking Iran, closed it. So as long as the blockade on Iran continues, Iran will continue the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. This is clear. Also, about the nuclear program, Iran is willing to give a winning look to the United States, and especially Trump, that can feed the public opinion in the United States, but at not the cost of Iran's national interest. Iran has been insisting for a peaceful nuclear program for over 20 years, and it has lost its leader over it. And right now, there is one thing clear. Iran will not let go the enriched uranium and the possibility of enriching uranium. So what Iran is offering is assurances much more than the JCPOA, which Trump withdrew in his first term. But as I said, not at the cost of national interests and long-term interests. Iran may agree to halt for enrichment for 10 years, 15 years, but at last it wants to keep the peaceful nuclear enrichment program intact. So Iran is willing to give more concessions like the additional protocol, and it is willing to give permissions to the IAEA inspectors to actively inspect the Iranian nuclear facilities.
Then let
but
me ask,
letting
let me just get to
program
Negah.
go is a red line.
Right. I mean, Negah, does that sound acceptable? It sounds like there's some flexibility on the Iranian side. Or does Trump feel, Washington feel, that that just brings them back to where they were before under the JCPOA, and he needs to say that he's had a real level of victory here that he can't talk his way around, if you follow me?
Yeah, I'm following you. I think I would kind of go back to how we started today's conversation. Right now, the MOU that we're focusing on right now is deliberately narrow. And the reason why it's so deliberately narrow is it really wants to be able to get to the point where we can create a pause and then have some real conversations on these very complicated issues. I think you can tell even amongst the panelists, the understanding of where this very wide gap exists in the thinking between both sides, not only both sides, but also a lot of the partners and allies in the region and what they're willing to accept and not accept. And I think, again, there's a lot of, a lot of demands, a lot of rhetoric that sound politically powerful, be it in Washington, be it in Tehran. But the reality is there's so much meat that still needs to be discussed that neither side want the deal to be framed in a way that they look humiliated with their own public.
Right.
So my concern right now is being able to get these parties to the table to have those real conversations, to be able to, at this point in time, there's quite a bit of leverage by both sides to force a situation where there's a kind of a fragile pause to allow them to have these conversations. But again, the gap is so wide. We have to think back, right? The JCPOA took more than a year and a half to really get into the crux of the matter. And so when what we're looking at right now, again, is going to be quite a bit of technical conversations.
Yeah, and it's technical conversation, but like you said, there are egos and pride at play here in those negotiations. But very quickly, Negah, we also have an issue within the United States whereby the question of congressional approval is still pending. Many Americans thought it was quite clear that it would have to be sought, but it seems that the White House is finding its way around that too. Do you expect that to persist, or will that become a major blocking issue?
It's going to be a key concern. I think the reality is going to be if we are going to take these in various different chunks, that engagement with Congress can vary and can depend. I think right now, where the administration is, and quite frankly where Congress is, they do want to see a pause or an end to this current conflict ahead of the midterm elections, ahead of what could be a really tough summer for the American public, given how expensive gas prices are and sort of the secondary, tertiary impacts of this supply chain issue. So we're going to have to see, but it's going to come down to the chunks of the heart of the matter of the negotiations.
Right. Alexandru, as for the many issues that are involved in these negotiations, some of the spoilers could easily be, what role Lebanon will have to play in deal-making here, and how much Hezbollah's security is a deal breaker for Iran and as well as Israel.
Yeah, I think the issue will be pushed on the discussion for sure. But we've seen that during this ceasefire, even though Israel positioned itself in such a way that they will decouple this secondary front line from the headline war of U.S.-Iran, we see that Israel hasn't issued too many comments on that respect. So there have been declaration, but not necessarily specific action against that particular situation. So I think this signals that both sides want a resolution to this war. And I think this is the only common point that the two sides actually have between US and Iran. Iran wants a resolution with US never coming back, and US wants a resolution with US never having to come back to the Iranian file. What is the key of the matter, and where I see actually the core problem, is the sequencing between behavior and benefits and benefits behavior. Iran wants to have some of the benefits now while keeping the behavior and negotiating this behavior later on in terms of Strait of Hormuz control, in terms of the nuclear program and so on and so forth. While US would have liked to have the change of behavior right now, and I think this is the main reason of the war itself, to try to push Iranian leadership into submission and accepting a change of behavior in terms of the nuclear file, then Hormuz happened and changed the equation considerably, and discuss relief adders. So I think the memorandum itself will have to hammer down this particular position, which hasn't really changed much for either of the sides.
Well, that's a lot to fit on one
Israel
page.
and the Lebanon front. Sorry?
You mentioned it has to in the memorandum, but that's a lot to fit on one page. That's what's a bit baffling about this.
I think it's very hard to get that in one page. It will be more a gentleman's agreement that they will end up discussing some of these points later on. But I'm not sure how US will be happy to be with this, and as well as I'm not sure how much Iran will be happy to relinquish some of its behavior now. So both sides need to give something, which would be presented as a temporary victory for their audiences.
And Mohammed, speaking of, positioning, we also know Iran's foreign minister is dealing with China right now. President Trump is supposed to meet in China next week. What do you expect Tehran to get out of this meeting with China, and where do you think China's position really is in respect to this war?
I think the United States and Trump administration want an end to this fight as soon as possible. And I think that Trump is planning to get this done before the meeting in China. And about Iran's position, because of Iran's rational actions and allowing some of the ships to pass through, like the Chinese ship, Turkish ships, and Indian ships, China is supporting Iran and wants to confront the United States in this matter. And that is why China and Russia are supporting Iran, because they want to somehow hold the United States accountable, especially Trump, because of its rogue actions, not just only against Iran, but also other countries. There is talks about invading Cuba, and that is another important issue. So what China is trying to say right now is that enough is enough, and the issue should be resolved diplomatically, not by imposing blockades on Iran, not by attacking Iran, which constitutes to the stabilization of the whole region, and it is bad for business. And China is thinking about the economy of the region and the oil shipments from the region.
Okay.
High oil prices is not good for China, and China wants this war to end, but not by force of the United States. And that is why it is supporting Iran in the National
Negah, quick
Security Council and other UN bodies.
Okay, quick 30 seconds, Negah, on China's position here.
Look, I think, obviously China's quite concerned about what's happening. Obviously, there's a concern of economic instability in the Gulf does not benefit China. But it does create a diplomatic space for them, with the actions happening where Washington's predictability or lack of predictability lies, makes it in many ways very easy for Beijing to normalize its own rise in the region. So I think in many ways, although China's always prioritized support for economic growth and economic stability, I think Xi Jinping right now increasingly sees the opportunity in this fragmentation and this perception of American leadership being a bit more volatile. So I would say in many ways, in terms of allies and partners, they may start increasingly hedge their relationships. And I think from an American perspective,
Negah,
we need to be concerned about
I'm
that.
going to have to interrupt you there because we are over time, actually, for this edition of the Newsmakers. So I'd sincerely like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us and our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.